Hey, what is going on, guys? I've been seeing quite a few of you are asking about what sensitivity you should be running in Project Flux Season 4. So in today's video, I asked some of my controller friends to share what sensitivity they are running, so this way we can see a wider sample with different playstyles and help you decide which sensitivity might be right for you. If you'd like to check out any of the players I mentioned, I'll link their channels in the pinned comment below. So we'll split this video into 3 parts. I'll introduce the players first off and give you a brief overview of their playstyle. We'll then move into the actual sensitivity, and then finally we'll draw some conclusions to help you decide what might be best for you. Okay, first off we have Rezi. Rezi's overall a strong player in pretty much every category, whether it be aim, mechanics, game sense, but Rezi's particularly good at sniping. So if sniping is something you really like to do, might be worth referencing Rezi's sensitivity in particular. Next, we have Issa. Issa's actually primarily a keyboard and mouse player, but he's still solid on controller. So if you're coming from keyboard and mouse, this might be a good reference point for you. Next, we have Harv. Harv's playstyle is overall pretty balanced. He's solid in most areas, but he's particularly good at shotgun aim and hitting one shots. So if that's something you want to do, might be worth looking at Harv's sense. Next, we have Fusion. Fusion's been L2ing for a really long time, even since like Era Season 4, but it's also really strong mechanically. So his playstyle's balanced, but is really good in both categories. Then we have Vale. Vale's a very mechanically focused player. However, I do want to note that Vale does play at about 100 ping to Flux EU. So do keep that in mind. But if you really like to play mechanically focused, might be a good sense to reference. And then finally, myself, if I played at more reasonable ping, I wouldn't play as extreme, but given I play at over 100 ping, basically my entire playstyle revolves around making L2 as effective as possible. Now that we've introduced all of our players, let's take a look at their individual sensitivity and then also get an average. But before we do that, I do want to explain to you what effective ADS and scope sensitivity means. Effective ADS and scope sensitivity is taking the average of your X and Y base and multiplying that by either your ADS or scope sensitivity multiplier. The reason why I think this is very important is because if you have a different base sensitivity compared to someone else, but you have the same ADS and scope multiplier, you do not have the same effective ADS or scoped sensitivity. So if you want to compare ADS and scoped across different bases, you need to calculate the effective sensitivity. Okay, let's start out with Rezi. Rezi actually runs the lowest base X and Y that we have today, which is 0.5, with ADS and scoped of 0.65. That gives Rezi an effective ADS and scope sensitivity of 0.33. Next, we have Issa. Issa runs a base X and Y of 0.7 with a ADS and scope sense of 0.42, which leads to an effective ADS and scope sense of 0.29. Something to note is this is the lowest effective ADS and scope sense out of anybody today. Next, we have Harv, who runs one of the highest sensitivities we have today, 0.7 base with 0.65 for ADS and scoped, which leads to an effective ADS and scope sensitivity of 0.46. Moving to Fusion, we have a 0.7 base, and Fusion is the only player that runs a different base Y with 0.6. Fusion's ADS sense is 0.7 and scope sense 0.65, which leads to an effective ADS sense of 0.46 and effective scope sense of 0.42. Next, we have Vale, who actually runs the exact same sensitivity as Harv. So 0.7 base X and Y, 0.65 ADS and scoped, which leads to effective ADS and effective scoped of 0.46. One thing I want to point out is Vale did mention to me if he played at lower ping, he would run 0.9 base. That would be helpful to improve building, but because Vale plays at 100 ping, he's currently not using that sensitivity. He's using 0.7 base instead. And then finally, we have myself, who runs 0.7 base X and Y, 0.68 ADS, and 0.6 scoped, which leads to an effective ADS sense of 0.48 and effective scoped of 0.42. Okay, now let's take a look at the averages. We have an average base X of 0.67, average base Y of 0.65. We have an average ADS multiplier of 0.63 and an average scope multiplier of 0.6, which leads to an average effective ADS sense of 0.41 and average effective scope sense of 0.4. Now that we've looked at each sensitivity in detail, let's try and draw some overall conclusions. And the first thing I notice is that the majority of players in pretty much every category are around a very similar sensitivity, and there might be 1 or 2 outliers. So, for example, base X, 5 of the 6 of us are all running 0.7 base X, with only Rezi being lower at 0.5. Base Y, 4 out of 6 of us are running 0.7 base X, with only Fusion and Rezi being a bit lower at 0.6 and 0.5 respectively. If we look at ADS, 5 of us are between 0.65 and 0.7 ADS, with only ISA being significantly lower at 0.42. And very similar situation with scope multiplier. 5 of us are between 0.6 and 0.65 scope multiplier, with only ISA being significantly lower at 0.42. If you look at effective ADS, we have 4 of us being between 0.46 and 0.48, with only Resi and ISA being significantly lower. And effective scope, very similar deal. 4 of us between 0.42 and 0.46, with only Resi and ISA being significantly lower, and those two are at 0.33 and 0.29 respectively for ADS and scoped. So what this means is, if you're looking for just the standard sensitivity, what is the typical sensitivity for controller players? We can't really look at the averages for base X and base Y, because although it's 0.67 and 0.65 in Flux Season 4, you can't go more than 1 decimal place. So 0.65 is not possible. You have to decide between 0.6 and 0.7. 0.7 X and Y, very typical. You have an ADS of 0.63, scoped of 0.6. But do keep in mind that there's not just one way to set it up. Those outliers are important because there are other viable ways to set it up, right? For instance, Resi likes to run a much lower base X and Y than everybody else. ISA likes to run a much lower scoped and ADS multiplier than everybody else. And both of them run a much lower effective ADS and scope sense than everybody else. So I don't want you to think that the standard sensitivity is the only option. You can play around quite significantly and find what works for you. But in terms of how I'd recommend you set up your sensitivity, I would say if any of the players we talked about today sound like they match up with your playstyle, that might be worth trying out their sensitivity as a baseline. So, for example, if you are a sniper-focused player, you find you're pretty good with snipers, maybe you try out Resi's sensitivity. Start with 0.5 base, 0.65 ADS and scoped, and then adjust from there. Or maybe you're trying out controller coming from keyboard, then maybe it's better for you to go with ISA's sense. Or you're really mechanically focused, you go with Dale's sense. Or you like to L2 aggressively, you play a high ping, you go with my sense, right? And you adjust from there. If you're not sure on your playstyle, you could just start out with the averages that I pointed out, so 0.7 X and Y with 0.63 ADS and 0.6 scope. You could do that. But if you can find a player that somewhat aligns with your playstyle, I'd start there. And then from there, feel free to adjust, right? Find what works for you. What I would say, though, is make sure to only make one change at a time and then try it. Because if you change your base and your multipliers, well, if it's better or worse, you'll have no way of knowing what did it. So make sure you're only making one change at a time and adjust from there and see what you like. And with that, I hope this video was helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one.